Daniel Ferreira from London School of Economics, please.
Thank you. So we normally care about what we do in our jobs and not just how much we get paid, right? And you know, we want our jobs to have some kind of purpose, some kind of meaning, and this could be anything. It could be like changing the world, saving the planet, helping people, or anything that you like. Another thing is that, you know, people also care about how their work is done. So, for example, people may care whether the jobs that they perform are sustainable or not. So, as a consequence of that, some people might be willing to forego some income to work in firms with better characteristics, to work, for example, in jobs that are more sustainable. And this is, you know, this is what labor economists call compensating differentials, that people are willing to forego some income to work in some firms that have better attributes. And I think the latest evidence on this from labor is that compensated differentials can actually be quite substantial. But I want to focus more on a more recent literature in labor and finance that is trying to estimate compensated differentials for things such as sustainability or ESG for a particular company. And essentially what some of these papers find is that people are willing to take wage concessions. They're willing to work for a lower wage if the company is more sustainable, if they have better ESG ratings. What they also find is that there's substantial heterogeneity in the sense that some people are willing to take a huge wage cut just to work for these companies, while other people are not willing to have any wage concession to work for a more sustainable firm. So on the basis of that, also our people who have no data will be like the only paper with no data in this conference. So what we're going to do is that based on this evidence, we're going to present a model where firms compete for workers who have this taste for a particular non-pecuniary attribute, and we're going to call it as quality because we don't want to take a stand on what that is. So it could be anything. It could be job purpose or meaning. It could be sustainability. It could be the ES, CSR attributes of the job. It could also be working conditions such as, you know, whether you can work from home or not. Anything that is good that, you know, the workers may perceive as positive. The key assumption here is that everyone prefers a high S quality job. However, they vary in their willingness to pay for that. That's the key assumption. So on top of that, from the production side, we're going to have two different types of firms, and we're going to have what we call technological flexibility, that we have one sector or one group of firms that we call flexible. Flexible firms, they can design different jobs with different levels, for example, of sustainability. So what we have in mind is something like this. Suppose you're producing a good, and in the process of producing that good, you have some emissions. You can either choose a technology in which you're going to have like a huge amount of emissions, or you can produce the same good with lower emissions. However, that's going to be costly, right? So you have flexibility, but you're going to pay a cost to reduce the emissions associated with your good. Some firms, depending on where they operate, they don't have this option. There might be just one way of producing that good. So these firms are going to be less flexible, okay? So we're going to compare the flexible firms with the inflexible firms. And our headline result is this, that flexible firms in equilibrium, they're going to become polarized in the sense that they will cater to those workers with the most extreme preferences, either very high preferences for sustainability or very low. So essentially what we're saying is that all firms are going to start as the same. They will choose which kind of firms they will be, so they are ex ante the same, but they will choose either to become very sustainable or not sustainable at all, right? That's going to be their choice. And where they're going to end up, they're going to end up either being, say, very green or very brown, and there's going to be nothing in the middle. And so that's what we're going to be calling polarization, that the firms start identical, but they actually polarize in equilibrium. So I'll explain where this comes from, but before that, let me tell you, what is the basis of the model. So the model is really old-fashioned. So it's a very old-fashioned compensating differential models in the style of Rosen. And let me tell you what the model does not have so they don't have to think about these things. So the model has no frictions whatsoever. So competition is perfect, symmetric information, there's plenty of capital, there's no risk, there's no agency or incentive issues, no financing constraints, which means that all the action in the model is driven only by preferences, technology, supply, and demand. That's all we have, okay? So despite the simplicity of the model, having none of these frictions, there are a lot of empirical predictions, and that's what I want to emphasize, just give you a list and then try to explain where they come from. But these are the kind of results that you can actually go and test that you can take from this model. So what we show is that this notion of firm polarization will increase with technological progress and with industry consultation, in a sense, with competition, with lack of competition. And more polarized sectors will have higher profits, lower wages, and a lower labor share of value added. And once we add to the model also socially responsible investors, we allow people to have also preferences, investors also to have preferences over asset quality. We have some additional predictions, such as more polarized sectors will have higher stock returns, and employee satisfaction is to be positively related to stock returns. So many of these predictions haven't really been tested yet. Some of them have. I mean, we know there's a paper by Alex Edmonds, for example, showing employee satisfaction being positively related to stock returns. But there are many other things that we would like to see done in empirical work. And I think the model is a good guide to give you some ideas so you can try new things. So let me tell you, it's as I said, it's an extremely simple model. So it's not really there's not much in the setup. So we have two different sectors, as I said. Each sector has a given number of firms. Each firm is going to be owned by a single entrepreneur. The entrepreneur is profit maximizing, always trying to maximize profit. Each firm can hire just one worker, and if they do, they will generate some revenue, Y. And the only other thing that the firm can do is to choose its sustainability level, if you want. And it's going to pay a cost that CS is the cost of sustainability, is the cost of asset quality. So the profit is essentially the revenue minus the wage minus the cost of sustainability. Now, sector one is a flexible sector. It means that any S can be chosen as long as you pay the cost. Sector zero is inflexible. You always have to choose S0. It's given to you. Now, from the side of workers, we have a given number of workers, which is given by L. And the key thing here is that all these workers, they have a particular utility function that depends on two things, depends on wages and depends on the asset quality. And we have this alpha here, which is the weight that you assign to asset quality. It indicates how much you care, for example, about sustainability. And the key assumption here is that all these agents are heterogeneous, so we have a distribution of this alpha in the population. Some people care a lot about sustainability, some people don't care at all about it. So that's what we have. Now, so before we try to solve for the equilibrium, let's just think about the following thought experiment where a firm is hiring a particular worker. And if they're going to, for example, bargain over what is the contract, what is the level of sustainability, and what's the wage, and if that bargain is going to be efficient, it will be equivalent to solving some kind of problem like this, just as a weighted average of the different surpluses. So it's the surplus of the worker and the surplus of the firm for some given weight. The key point here is that no matter what these weights are, the answer to this problem is going to be this condition here, which essentially says this is going to be the marginal cost of sustainability from the point of view of the firm. This is the marginal benefit of sustainability from the point of view of the worker. So essentially just equating marginal cost with marginal benefit. What this says is that for any given type of worker, there's only going to be one optimal level of sustainability given our assumptions here. So essentially what we have in here is just a tangency between indifference curves and isoprofits. So this is as basic as you can get in terms of micro theory. Now, this is actually the key result in the paper, at least the key theoretical result in the paper. If we define what we call here the profit potential for a given type, this is the maximum profit that a firm could extract from a worker of a given type. So if I match with someone who has an alpha of 0.5, what is the maximum profit I could extract from this worker, assuming that this worker has the option to work in the inflexible sector if it doesn't work for me. And the key result here is that this function is going to be strictly U-shape in alpha. And this is what is going to explain our polarization result. And the intuition for this result, I mean, mathematically it's very easy to show, but intuition for this result is an option value intuition. Say, suppose someone is working in the inflexible sector and is very unhappy because the inflexible sector is not providing the right amount of sustainability that they want. If I am a flexible firm and I approach that worker and say, look, work for me because I can adjust the sustainability to give you exactly what you want, you know, the further away I am from that optimal level, the further away my preference is from what I am now, the more value I think this offer will be. So if I have a very extreme preference for sustainability, I'm going to think this offer is very attractive. And then, of course, the profit potential is going to be very high. And the argument goes exactly the same way in the other direction. If I'm working in the inflexible sector, but what I really want is money, I don't really care about this flexibility. If someone comes to me, look, we're a very dirty firm, we don't care about this, but we're going to pay you a lot. And then I'm going to enjoy this as well. So this explains why this thing is U-shape, and this is what's going to drive the polarization result. So how will competition work? So firms will compete just by offering different pairs of contracts. Competition is going to be perfect competition. So there's going to be a Vaurasian equilibrium, Vaurasian auctioneer just setting these contracts, and firms will just choose which contracts they want to offer. Flexible firms are scarce. Inflexible firms are not scarce. So, which means that inflexible firms will have zero profit in equilibrium because there are too many of them, and they will offer some given contracts. It's always the same because they can't really differentiate themselves. So the way it's going to work for the flexible firms is that the auctioneer is going to choose some wage function, which is like one wage for each different sustainability level. Then the workers will choose which kind of firm they want to be. You know, they're going to be more sustainable, less sustainable firms. And then the workers will just apply to whatever their preferred jobs is. And as long as supply equals demand, this is going to be in equilibrium. And what we show in the paper is like it's only one solution to this problem. And let me show like just a figure how this actually works. So this U-shaped thing is that profit potential function that I mentioned to you before. It's going to be, this is the profit potential as a function of alpha, the type of worker you match with. Because competition is perfect for the flexible firms, they all have to make the same profit no matter where they locate. Otherwise, they would try to locate somewhere else. Okay? So suppose that the profit that you have in equilibrium is exactly this value here, this VZ. So it's the same for no matter which location you choose. Now, if you find location Z here, that's exactly when the profit is exactly identical to the profit potential, which means that any worker to the left of Z will not accept to work for the flexible sector because its surplus is going to be negative. Because the maximum surplus you could extract from someone to the left is lower than the profit that the firm actually gets. So that means that anyone in this middle region here, which is white, is not working for a flexible firm. So flexible firms are either green in that region here or brown, and everyone else in the middle is going to be working for an inflexible firm. So that's exactly the polarization equilibrium. I can show in a different picture, but I'm going to skip that. It's just a different way to show the same thing. And I'm just going to summarize the equilibrium properties here. So what we have in this very simple model is that first we have firm polarization, meaning flexible firms will cater to the workers with extreme preferences. We're going to have compensated differentials, that the wage function is going to be decreasing. This is sort of obvious in a model like this, right? So that when you have a high sustainability, you're going to have lower wages. We're going to have inequality, a particular type of inequality, that those workers with the most extreme preferences are the ones who are going to get more surplus from this deal. They are going to benefit more than those workers who are in the middle. And there's also no link between profit and purpose here because all firms will actually be making exactly the same profit in equilibrium, no matter whether they are green or blue. Now, we can do more.
So this is what we get in the more general version of the model. If I want to parameterize a model and assume two things, you get like a particular cost function that is quadratic, and I have some kind of uniform distribution of types, we can get even more results because we can actually solve everything in closed form. So I'm just going to skip this slide. This is just how we actually solve the model, but that doesn't matter. And let's give you like what I think is interesting. So once we actually solve the model with these particular assumptions, what we get an expression for a degree of polarization. And polarization is just the distance, the size of that interval, right, between the lowest sustainability level of the green firm and the highest sustainability level of the brown firm, right? That's our definition of polarization. And this is how polarization is going to look like in this model. It depends on three things. I'll tell you what these parameters are. The first was this delta is a dispersion of preferences in the population. This is just saying that if we, all of us, become more polarized, because now some people really want sustainability, others don't want, then firms will also become more polarized. That seems sort of obvious, but it's a good reality check to see that the model delivers that. The other two results are less obvious. So this is saying that the flexible firms, the polarization will increase when firms have more market power. As firms have more market power in the labor market, they're going to go more to the extremes, and we're going to find even more polarization. And finally, if there is some technological progress that makes it easier for us to produce stuff with less emissions, of course, emissions are going to fall across the board, but firms are going to become even more polarized. The distance between the green firms and the brown firms are going to become even more pronounced, even though the levels are going to go down. So I think these are interesting things. There are winners and losers, right? So more polarization matters because it implies higher profits, lower wages, and a smaller labor share of value added. And there are welfare effects as well. More industry concentration will definitely reduce workers' welfare, that's obvious. But the technological progress effect is ambiguous because it's a biased technological change that will benefit more those who really like sustainability and less those who don't want. And finally, in the last maybe 2 minutes I will talk about, so if we, on top of this model, we just add outside investors, meaning that now, suppose now there are some investors who will buy shares from the entrepreneur. And there are two types of investors, like people in this literature like to assume. They're the traditional investors who only care about profit, and the socially responsible investors who care both about profit but also sustainability. And then we're assuming the same kind of utility function. Now we're replacing alpha with beta, right? So beta is how much I care about sustainability, and 1 minus beta is how much I care about profits, right? So what this will happen is that when you try to find the optimal level of sustainability, I think it's obvious if the owner of your company is a sustainable investor, they want to have a higher level of sustainability, so it's going to be a little bit higher as well. But what is really interesting here is the following. Now, because we have two different types of investors, we have two different types of these profit potential functions, okay? And they're going to have this shape, and the actual profit potential that will determine the equilibrium is going to be the upper envelope of the two, okay? And what you can see in here is that they cut in a particular way, meaning that the original profit potential is going to be higher at the extremes. What does that mean? It means that the traditional investors are going to be the ones investing in the extreme firms. So we have this perfect segmentation in equilibrium in which the profit-driven investors will either invest in very brown firms or also very green firms. And the socially responsible investors are going to be stuck in the middle. And you may think that this is counterintuitive, but what's happening here is that there is more profit to be made at the green firms. That's why you attract the profit-driven investors, okay? So now let me just conclude with just a few of the additional implications from this part of the model. So what we have is that relative to inflexible firms will have higher market valuations because flexible jobs are more valuable but scarce. And we're going to have higher stock returns as well because firms that are owned by the profit investors, in our model, are going to have zero returns, which is the fair return. But firms owned by S investors are going to have negative returns, right? So their returns are going to be lower. And because the worker utility is higher at the extremes, as we claimed before, stock returns will be positively related to employee satisfaction as well, which is something I mentioned before. Let me stop now because I'm out of time, so thank you very much.
So Daniel, the fact that your paper is the only paper on the program with no data speaks to how highly
By the way, it's you always got to have the token theory paper on the program. I know that as a theorist. It's nice to not see any snow outside. Well, my slides are being loaded. We got 2 feet of snow at my house, and the University of Colorado and public schools have been closed yesterday and today, and it's our executive MBA Friday, Saturday, and so like everyone's in chaos because we don't know what to do. We only get a couple touch points with our exec MBA students. All right. I'm Shaun Davies, and I first want to thank the conference organizers for asking me to discuss this amazing paper, and also to provide me the opportunity to cross Delaware off my list of states I've never been to. So thank you for that. But I have a lot to say, so I'm going to jump right in. We know that individuals are increasingly considering purpose in how they allocate capital, right? We spend a lot of time thinking about how individuals allocate capital through screening, socially responsible investing mandates, ESG compliant portfolios. But if you talk to your students, you probably also realize that a lot of individuals are also considering how they allocate their labor. My students all want to do something that's going to make the world a better place. Most of the academic finance papers are really focused on the allocation of capital, and I'm guilty of writing a few of these. For example, socially responsible, impact investing, things like that. And there's this new literature focusing on the allocation of labor. Okay, it's very new. And what's good about it is there's few papers that jointly consider the real side of the firm and the financial side. And so this paper helps fill the gap. Now, for my discussion today, I always try to provide something for the audience as well as something for the authors. And so for the audience, given that this is a conference style, I'm just going to revisit the model and provide a better appreciation for the mechanism and try to make everything a little bit more clear. And for the authors, I want to push them to take the message further because I think they have something really special here. And my big point is that the authors have uncovered a credible signal of firms' commitment to purpose. All right, so for the audience, what are the model's building blocks in the key features? Well, we're going to have workers, and they're going to have heterogeneous preferences for social good or purpose. And that's going to be their type. And so that type is going to be denoted as alpha I, where low values of alpha I mean you don't value purpose as much, and higher values of alpha I mean you value it a lot. Then there's going to be firms. And all firms can generate a deterministic cash flow or deterministic earnings Y if they employ a worker. Now, there's going to be 2 sectors of firms. There's going to be flexible firms and inflexible firms. And flexible firms can choose any level of purpose they want, from 0 to infinity. But importantly, it's going to be costly. So there's going to be this convex cost function. Inflexible firms, they can do nothing. They're compelled to produce a level of purpose S0 at the cost C of S0. And so what's interesting is that the employees' types, their alphas, are going to interact with what level of purpose the firms choose. And so there's going to be this non-pecuniary benefit to the workers of alpha I times S. And so what this means then for the flexible sector is they have this lever in choosing S to increase the match surplus when they're matched with workers. And types are observable in all those things. There's no frictions. It's a beautiful model. And so naturally, this lever is going to have the most impact for workers with the most extreme types, those with really low values of alpha and those with really high values of alpha. Now, what's going to happen in equilibrium? Well, firms are going to compete with each other, and they're going to sort themselves to exploit the lever. Some firms are going to choose very low levels of purpose. And the reason why is they can attract low alpha types that don't value purpose. And so they're going to increase surplus by not producing as much purpose because the employee doesn't value it. Okay, and so that's where the surplus is going to be generated for the low alphas, is through spending less. Other firms are going to choose to have tons of purpose, much larger than the baseline, and they're going to attract high alpha types, and that's going to generate more surplus. And for the firm, that means they can spend less via cash wages. Okay, because you have this non-pecuniary benefit that the workers internalize like cash. And so the total surplus is going to grow with the more extremes, both low alpha and high alpha. Importantly, though, okay, competition among firms implies that firm profits in the flexible sector are equal. And so what we can take away from that then is that residual surplus, okay, is going to go to workers, and workers with the most extreme types are going to extract the most rents. So those that are endowed with low alpha will enjoy a lot of surplus. Those with really high values of alpha will also enjoy a lot of surplus. And what we're then going to do is we're going to introduce investors. And I recognize that Daniel wasn't able to get into this as much as he wanted. I think this is a really interesting and important part of the paper. There's going to be two types of investors: profit-driven and socially responsible. And the way that we're going to model their preferences is that socially responsible investors are willing to substitute purpose for cash profit, with weights B and 1 minus B respectively. Because flexible firms have a lever to enhance profitability, they will attract the profit-driven investors, those that don't care about purpose. So that's kind of counterintuitive, that the firms that generate the most purpose are actually going to attract the profit-driven, capitalists smoking cigars and burning down the rainforest. And the reason why, though, is these investors internalize cash profit 1 for 1. And these investors are going to compete profits to 0. In flexible firms, they're going to attract the socially responsible investors. And that's because socially responsible investors are going to accept beta times this baseline level of purpose in lieu of cash. So now we're going to do some things for the authors and the audience, and we're going to talk about greenwashing. And this dovetails really nicely with the last paper. That was not planned. So if we think about US publicly traded firms as a grocery store, there's a lot of socially responsible investors out there that care about how they're allocating their dollars. And as they go down the grocery aisle, they see signs like this that say 100% natural. And what they think they're getting is they're getting these really good organic ingredients, and they're doing something good for the world. But in reality, they're getting natural Cheetos. Okay, we know that corporate greenwashing is prevalent, and that firms are doing it to attract capital. And so many firms, okay, we all know this, engage in greenwashing, or as I'm going to call it here, purpose cheap talk to attract capital. Now, last Wednesday, the SEC passed the climate disclosure rules in part to address this cheap talk, this corporate greenwashing. Nevertheless, credible signals of what firms are doing are scarce, and Pedro talked about this. I mean, if you look at the ESG metrics across, the correlations across them are close to 0. They're very, very noisy. And even in this model, competition among firms and investors eliminates meaningful information from prices. Okay? The only variation in the model in stock prices is coarse, and it's driven by whether or not you're a flexible firm or an inflexible firm. That's the only variation in prices. So it's really hard to look at market prices and tease out if firms are actually doing the right thing. That said, workers are boots on the ground. Workers are ingrained in the corporation or in the firm, and they have firsthand knowledge of what actually is happening. Moreover, conceding monetary wages, if you see employees taking low pay, that is a very credible signal that a firm is doing legit things and walking the walk. And so wages have significantly more variation and provide richer measurements. So the implications for empirical studies is we know in the labor literature there are tons of papers trying to explain wages. So we have a lot of already known independent variables to explain wage differentials. And so this model, and in addition some existing studies, suggests that unexplained wage differentials across firms may proxy as a credible signal of a firm's commitment to purpose. So not looking at the stock prices, but instead looking at workers' wages. And refining such a measure and validating it may improve how investors allocate capital, how ESG scores are computed, and provide accountability for firms to walk the talk. And so I think what the authors can do here is they're sitting on this golden nugget, and they can provide the genesis of such a measure using wage differentials. Now, in conclusion, how am I doing? Good, right on time? I have some minor suggestions for the authors. Audience, you can tune out for a second. The impact and divestment discussion, really good, but I'd like to see more about it. They're isomorphic in the model, but it would be helpful for empiricists to maybe put a little more flesh on that. I think adding some more discussion around your rich empirical predictions, giving some more practical guidance of maybe what to measure would assist in increasing the paper's impact. And then the firm creation section, move to the internet appendix or maybe flesh it out more. That said, I personally love this paper because it connects the real side of the firm with the financial side. I found the figures to be incredibly informative. I was working off an earlier version of the paper before the figures were put in, and Daniel was kind enough to send me the revised version about 3 weeks ago. And my understanding of the paper was just so enhanced by those figures. So you could probably do even more, but it's wonderful. I look forward to seeing the next version, ... If any of you have read the paper, on page 23, there is a Moss-Callel Winston Green reference. And so I just want you to think about who your audience is. That some of us may still be experiencing trauma from their first year micro qualifiers. And that was me staying for my comp back in 2008.
I already got the slides before, so Shaun already knew exactly what he was going to say. So, but he said it much better than I did. So thank you very much.
Any questions? Go ahead, yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, very clean results. No frictions. That's very nice. So I'm just curious as to, to what extent, of course, the nice assumptions makes things clean. But then I'm thinking, okay, in reality, okay, in the theory, it relies on, firms' ability to essentially price discriminate based on people's preferences. So you can offer a lower wage, but then in reality, okay, if there's unobservable productivity and adverse selection, I mean, you couldn't really do that without, attracting poorer quality workers. I mean, I guess in the back of my mind, I have a typical case of these firms I have is maybe in California, right? You have all these tech firms with, socially conscious workers, but it doesn't strike me that they're getting lower wages relative to their productivity. I'm just curious what your take is on this. Yeah.
Well, it is, of course, the case that we don't have any other source of heterogeneity that is not the preferences, right? So we assume that everyone is equally qualified. If you look at the empirical work, I mean, the paper, for example, by Colonelli and co-authors, actually they find this correlation. What they find is that the people who have stronger preferences for, say, sustainability are also better qualified. And they still find controlling for that quality that they are willing to take lower wages. So of course, if you don't control for type, you may find that the workers who are working for socially responsible firms, they actually be paid more. But you have to obviously empirically you have to control for their type. I think it's a natural extension for the model to include other sources of heterogeneity and see how the equilibrium is going to look like once you have different abilities as well. But I think as a first pass, you really want to have a benchmark model. I think the way we see this is that this is a benchmark model. This is what we expect to happen if there were no frictions, no adverse selection or anything like that, or not even any heterogeneity in types. And then I think you can just add on that to see what you get on top. So I think the model is a first step in that sense. What it was surprising to us is that even as a benchmark model, there's a huge number of predictions that you can get. The thing about whether you actually get the compensated differentials or not, and whether they are willing to have weight concessions, I leave it to the empirical papers who have shown that this is the case. The question is, can you actually control for quality or not?
The purpose could also be interpreted broadly. So, for example, like work-life balance, right? So
Yes.
I read a paper basically say, why do you overwork the law firm or investment banking associates 100 hours a week? It's precisely from the sorting model. You want to
Yes.
capture that kind of employee who so hungry for money.
Yes.
The substitution such that it's the most profitable way for you to run a business. So I thought it's not just about the ESG part, but it's a more broad
Yes.
interpretation explaining those
Yes.
fascinating facts.
Yes. So
Yeah.
I'll say that's why we try to call it as quality. I think one of the I think what you have in mind is very similar to what I have in mind, that we're defining the industry from the labor market perspective. It's like people who could either work, say, in investment banks or for a tech firm. If they work for investment banks, they're going to work 100 hours in terrible conditions, but they're going to be paid more. They work for a tech firm and they start like playing ping pong during the day and working from home and this kind of stuff. And these are people that are equally qualified. It could either go this way. They are both, compared to the general population, very highly paid, right? But the investment bankers are paid even more, but their life is terrible. Exactly. But both of these firms are making high profits in a way, because one is going one way and the other is going the other way.
So I'm a low-paid government worker, so clearly I have a high alpha, but I used to be an investment banker. And the way I would validate myself is I would say, well, I'll take all of that extra pay and I will invest it back in good things. Mm-hmm. And so I wonder what would happen if you made your employees also the investors in the model.
So it's a great question. So we just work on an extension exactly on this question. It's now is in the internet appendix, so in the new version we'll see. Yes, it's too much already. So there is a sense, there are two things. So there is a sense first that, the results in the model remain the same because there is some kind of separation, like this, even in fund, like a two-fund separation that, you invest in one way and you work in a different way. And because of this separation, what you have is that perhaps, I would say perhaps unsurprising, you're not going to invest in the same firms that you work for, right? So we will work for a firm, say, a more sustainable firm. It doesn't mean you're going to invest in a more sustainable firm, and vice versa. Like, so the people in the middle, for example, they will be investing, I guess, if you have unlike you, if you have a low alpha, you might be investing in firms with low alpha or high alpha, or the firms with low S or high S, because the firms with high S will give you a lot of profit. So again, you're low alpha, you were working for a low S firm, but then you're going to invest in a high S firm. So there's going to be exactly situations similar like you, that you're doing one thing in your work and you're doing something else as an investor. So it's something we've been working on, is fairly recent.
I want to distinguish between public purpose and private purpose. It's kind of very similar to Terra. I mean, if somebody commits me to give me double the pay for a shitty firm,
yes,
I can take that and give it to something that I care about.
Yes.
I may not care about the stuff that the firm is caring about,
yes,
right? So I'm happy to get higher pay, but give 100% of the excess to charity that I care about. How do you factor that in the book?
Well, yes, we don't have that, and maybe something we should add to this extension that I'm talking about, because what we will need that, so your story has a friction that we don't have, which is financing constraints. You need the low S job to give you money so you can apply this money somewhere else. And that's a kind of friction that we don't have in the model. Then I think we can start with the model and add these frictions. Like, if I want to do good as an investor, then I have to work for a bad firm that gives me a lot of money. And I think that will be that's the reason why we don't have it, is because we don't have these financing constraints. But if we add them, then we could get the result along the lines you suggest.
Thank you very much. So for the sake of time, postponing the rest of the questions for after the session.